Let me show you something else before I have to roll. There's this Macron video. Maybe I'll save these for tomorrow. There's a Macron video and Bolton video, but I have to run. But before we leave, I wanted to take a moment to read, I think, one of the most despicable anti-democratic pieces that I've read about this. Give me one moment to snag it. Which is a piece in The Atlantic called Tom Nichols, right? By Tom Nichols. Claiming that it's your fault. Y'all, the listener, the American people are responsible for this bloodthirsty war here. Again, this is the anti-democracy aspect that's been so frustrating to me about all of this. The American public now has what it wanted. So y'all don't understand the consequences like Tom Nichols. Kabul has fallen. Americans will now exercise their usual partisan outrage for a few weeks, and then Afghanistan, like everything else in a nation with an attention span not much longer than a fast food commercial, will be forgotten. I agree about the partisan stuff being pretty despicable, but you can see the hatred for the people that is just soaking throughout this piece. People will be upset about the optics. He compares this occupation to Korea and Vietnam, and basically says Afghanistan was different from Korea and Vietnam. No, except in this was a war that was immensely popular at the outset and mostly conducted in the full view of the American public. The problem was that once the initial euphoria, what a word, to describe mass murdering and destruction of society and generations of people, children born with birth defects, people losing their parents, their children. Once the initial euphoria wore off, the public wasn't much interested in it. Coverage in print media remained solid, but cable news coverage of Afghanistan dropped off quickly, especially once a new adventure was launched in Iraq. Insane way to frame it. One, basically arguing that, if only the American people were more fervent in their attention, they're paying more attention to this war, then there would have been a different solution. I absolutely agree in the sense of like an anti-war movement, but that's not what this guy's talking about. This guy is wanting for there to have been more attention and more desire to increase troops attacking, they wanted to just have a continuous state, as Tom says, euphoria around the war, which is just so disturbing and despicable. The soldiers who served overseas in those first years of major operations soon felt forgotten. America is not at war was a common refrain among the troops. We're at war. America's at the mall, right? Well, why is there this kind of disconnect from the daily life of American people and America's imperial adventures in Afghanistan? Could it be because this intervention had nothing to do with American people or American safety, right? And instead everything to do with lining the pockets of extremely influential and wealthy contractors and military interests? Could it be that the United States occupation and destruction of Afghanistan had nothing to do with bringing freedom, protecting American freedom and bringing freedom to people in that part of the world? Yeah, that's exactly what it was, right? It had nothing to do with people's lives. So yeah, people stopped paying attention and started to wonder why the hell we were there in the first place, right? Because they were told and lied to by their government. And we can, criticize that moment in history. It really did show a kind of thick-skulled part of the American culture and population that is unfortunate, and it's something that we have to overcome. But by God, to sit here and act like the reason that Afghanistan was a disaster is because the American public didn't care enough about it is so despicable. They didn't care about it because it was about making money for a small group of people while sending our children and young people into a war that they could never win, that was extremely brutal, and we're going to be dealing with the consequences of that for decades and decades. Nothing compared to the consequences that the people of Afghanistan faced. Now those same Americans, this is reading from the piece again, have the full withdrawal from Afghanistan that they apparently wanted. Some 70% of the public supports a pullout. Now that they care that intensely about it, as the foreign policy scholar Stephen Biddle recently observed, the war is practically an afterthought in U.S. politics. again, he's blaming us for for this disaster because we didn't understand it and all these people wanted to leave. And he says at the end of this paragraph, but Presidents Obama, Trump, and Biden all ran on getting out of the war, and now we're out. 70% of Americans want something, and then the government, the people in power, try to deliver on that. This is not a defense of Trump or Biden or Obama. This is an attack on a kind of extremely anti-democratic way of thinking, right? Well, 70% of the American population wants something to be done. You live in a democracy. Oh, but it's absurd that anyone in power would ever entertain doing that. And then he talks about how, we use Afghanistan for cheap patriotism. No, not the warmongers. The people, we use it. And then this is the bit that really stuck out to me. After the worst attack on U.S. soil, Americans had no real interest in an adult conversation about the reality of an anti-terrorist operation in a harsh environment such as Afghanistan. Nor did they want to think about whether draining the swamp and modernizing and developing Afghanistan, which could mean a lot more than a few elections, was worth the cost and effort. Maybe it would have been worth it. Or maybe such a project was impossible. We'll never know for certain. Because American political and military leaders only tried pieces of several strategies, never a coherent whole, mostly to keep the costs and casualties down and to keep the war off the front pages and away from a public that didn't want to hear about it. Jesus Christ, Lord in heaven, give me the strength. It's just something else to sit here and say this in 2021. Yeah, the strategy in Afghanistan was a disaster, right? It's because it served no human end, or like it served no humanitarian end. It served the ends of certain human wishes, of certain people, of certain psychopaths, right? Remember more and more, the fact that the military was operating under its own playbook has a little bit more to do with the fact that America has failed in many of its democratic structures, right? That the connection between civilian control of the military has been all but severed, right? Not to do with not because Americans just aren't paying enough attention and reading your shitty articles about this war. It's so despicable. I mean, I really have to go. But here's the icing on the cake. A serious people, the kind of people we once were. Yeah. Like we once were when we were dropping Agent Orange on villagers in Vietnam or intervening in a war in Korea so far away from us, right? The days when we were serious people, when we were destroying democratically elected governments the world over, back when we were serious people. It's back to the piece now. A serious people, the kind of people we once were, would have made serious choices long before this current debacle was upon them. They would today be trying to learn something from nearly 2,500 dead service members and many more wounded. They would be grimly assessing risk and preparing both overseas and at home for the reality of a terrorist nation making its way back onto the international map. That's the intellectual situation. That's the Atlantic. That's the decorated experts that Clymer and all of them say we need to be deferring to. Give me a break. This guy has contempt for you. He has contempt for people. He has contempt for people in Afghanistan. He certainly has contempt for the American people. We should be learning something from the people who died in that war. But continuing it is not the answer. And blaming it on an American public that finally, too late, by the way, but decided that war is not for us. It's not something that we should be supporting. No more people should be dying in a war that serves no purpose other than lining the pockets of a few assholes and destroying an entire country. That's the lesson that we should be learning. It's amazing to sit here and read something like that after all that we've seen, after all the lies that have been revealed, after all the horror that has been so well documented. It's truly, truly something else. But remember, as Matt always likes to point out, it's the center that really, really is against democracy. They don't want you to be making decisions because they think once American people make decisions, they won't be acting in the interest of the war machine. And I think that's very damn true. And I think that's a good thing. So we need to keep on with that. Appreciate all of y'all. I gotta run today, but I'll be seeing y'all tomorrow at 7 Central, 8 Eastern. We'll be joined by Harvey K. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about this. I'd love to get Matt's thoughts. As always, feel free to join us at patreon.com/leftreckoning. My email DMs are always open to questions, comments, and thoughts. Maybe it's a hard transition, but I have some cool ideas for some merchandising opportunities. So if anyone knows anything about some good union shops or things like that, I'd really appreciate a tip, because I've been wanting to. I have some cool ideas for shirts and stuff I'd like to get out there, but I want to make sure we're doing that as ethically and nicely as possible, and affordably too, of course. But y'all, I'll see y'all tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Don't let these assholes get you down. Remember, we got a lot of fight left in us, and we're just moving on. And, solidarity to people of Afghanistan, people of Haiti, and press people all